the the frame this framework, I'll be referring first to disability justice, and this framework combines various methods and various minority groups simultaneously, whether it's women, the LGBTQ plus community, immigrants, and other individuals. And this framework emphasizes that we should all be treated equally throughout throughout an understanding of environmentalism, oppression, accommodations, economic status, perspectives, and other underserved challenges. And one of the most famous disability justice scholars is Mia Mingus, and she's a writer and poet. And in one of her blog posts, she discusses the similarities and differences between independence and interdependence. And she stresses that independence is a significant aspect of the disability community when it comes to being able to thrive and live more inclusive lives with the without having to rely as much on the assistance of others. But interdependence also specifies that without being able to connect with other individuals, whether they're from the disability community or not, interdependence is also a significant framework. So the next slide.
Another reason that accessible marketing is so significant has a lot to do with the audience we're trying to bring into our spaces, appeal to our programs, and allow to feel welcome in everything that we have to offer. Has a lot to do with statistics. The National CDC reported in 2023 that 27% of adults in the nation have disabilities. The Ohio Center for Disease Control reported in 2021 that 28% of Ohio's adults have disabilities. And the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities recently reported that 14.1% of Ohioans overall have disabilities. So you can probably assume that a quarter or perhaps slightly less percent of the audience that you are trying to reach has a disability. And what you might want to think about is if everything you're offering is accessible as possible, are they able to access your marketing materials in a way that they feel part of what you have to offer? And if you feel like individuals with disabilities are not included in that audience, then you need to consider why and why not. It's really important to take these steps to ask yourself those hard questions, because that's how we change the way we think and we operate as organizations. It helps dispel ableist myths and practices. It helps change workflow practice and also helps develop new policies that our programs and missions can better serve the audience we're actually seeking. So I'm assuming that as part of your mission and the audience that you want to be part of your programs, you are here because you want to include the disability community. Having a good sense of how many people that actually might be internally and externally to your organization can really be supportive in providing the impetus you need to do so. Another really important reason why accessibility matters, particularly to marketing, but across the board, is that it's simply a civil right. Let me advance my slide here. I think probably a lot of you have heard of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was ratified in 1990. But if you aren't, it's a major civil rights law that prohibits discrimination of people with disabilities in many aspects of public life. It is not a perfect law. There's lots of holes. It does not tell you how to make everything that you offer more accessible. However, it definitely exists. And people do often feel discriminated in public places, a lot of times in culture and arts organizations. And considering everything that the ADA requires can be really helpful in changing that. As recently as April of 2024, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division finalized a ruling of Title II of the ADA. This rule requires that state and local governments make their websites and mobile applications accessible for people with disabilities. The ADA, the agency is adopting the technical standards of Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is sometimes called WCAG 2.1 Level AA. So we know that our websites are enormous marketing tools moving forward. So we are going to focus a portion of our presentation today on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And please know that even if you are not the person who develops your website, you're not like, you don't know how to navigate your website on the back end and things like that, this is still a wonderful resource to pass along to the individuals who are doing so as you are revamping websites, auditing websites, building new websites, designing websites, and so forth. Finally, Joy is going to talk a little bit about this concept of a social model versus medical model and how it can support accessibility.
The social model, I have within the disability studies field, two separate perspectives exist. The medical model only describes the disability community with a medical condition. And in other words, this signifies brokenness and loss. However, the social model refers to the positive philosophy of disability and how we can alter the various perspectives concerning this process, whether it's job related, employment, education, just a lot of different aspects. And also, the social model goes on to explain that disabled individuals aren't the problem. It's the lack of understanding and also visible and invisible barriers that are often encountered within society, because typically some non-disabled individuals who may not be familiar with the disability experience consider that the disability community may not be as capable or competent compared to the non-disability community as a whole. Then the next slide.
And to kind of conclude Joy's point about that, really what the social model versus medical model is saying is that the impetus is on us to make things more accessible for individuals with disability. It is not on the person with the disability to make that change in the world. Although there's a large portion of individuals with disabilities working very hard to make positive change in terms of accessibility in the world. But it's everybody's job because it's a societal problem. It's not an individual problem. Okay, so now you have some reasons, and please know that Joy and I could do a 2-hour presentation on the reasons why accessibility is essential for your organization, and particularly in marketing. But hopefully the 4 reasons that we chose today are a good starting point for you all. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about general design aesthetics that you can consider across platforms for accessible marketing. So these general design aesthetics can apply for the most part to social media, websites, newsletters, and print materials, and maybe something else that I'm not thinking of in terms of marketing. So if you are doing these general things that I'm going to go through, you are making your marketing materials visually more accessible for many individuals. This not only applies to individuals who have low vision or who are blind, it also applies to individuals who have cognitive disabilities, individuals who have learning disabilities, and it applies to older aging adults, And sometimes it can even apply to people with physical disabilities who have challenges navigating websites, social media, and things like that due to their physical disability. So basically, a lot of people benefit from including these design aesthetics. The first thing I want to talk about, um, and this is a hill I will die on, is the use of sans serif fonts in all of your marketing materials, not just in the copy you are providing, but also in any kind of logo that you're designing, any kind of header that you're providing, any kind of exhibition title, any kind of beautiful program cover you are creating. The sans serif font is the most accessible font for individuals with low vision, individuals with learning disabilities, again, older aging eyes. And it is even more accessible when people are reading on their phones, and they're looking at your website on their phone, or trying to enlarge a flyer that is perhaps posted on your website, read the newsletter, and so forth. There are many beautiful sans serif fonts available. You can Google them. I'm going to tell you to Google a lot. You can find a lot of really great accessibility information via Google. But they're often free and downloadable. So please consider doing that moving forward. We always want to make sure that we are using bold contrast and or black and white in the designs that we are creating. This is going to be the most accessible way for someone to read a screen. We don't want any text or any kind of image to get lost because the contrast is not the right ratio. And we do not want kind of any dissonance, that color dissonance that happens sometimes because we're not using proper contrast. There are contrast checkers. We're going to share a few of those resources with you later on, but I'm telling you, you can just get out your color wheel and you can choose a color on one side, and that can be your first color. And then you can go to a color on the other side, and that is your contrasting color in terms of developing contrasting fonts or just using black and white whenever it makes sense to do so. We encourage you to use a typeface of at least 14. Obviously on social media, that's like, that it has more to do with the size someone is making their screen, but on a website or any print material and in your newsletters, please use typeface of at least 14. This may mean you cannot provide as much copy as you would like to, but in terms of accessibility for all the reasons and the individuals that I mentioned before, it is going to make what you have to say or what you're trying to convey much more accessible. You also want to please bullet or space text whenever you can for those same reasons. When we're marketing, we're just trying to grab someone's attention. So we want them to see what we're offering and get a good sense of what's happening quickly. And then if you need to, you can include a QR code or a website link, or just simply a website address for folks to go get additional information if there's more that they need to find out later. I have on the screen an example of a postcard that we created for Accessible Expressions Ohio exhibition. All of the typeface on here is sans serif, and the font size is much larger. And this card is not very big. I can't remember what the measurements are right now, and I should have had that ready for you. But you can see even the imagery is spaced out appropriately. We have bold headings. We have appropriate contrast, and we have adequate spacing between the text. For digital marketing, any image that you're including on your website and a newsletter needs to be downloadable. This allows folks to download images and enlarge them so that they can check them out a little bit more in detail, look at them more closely. You always want to include image descriptions and or alt text. We are going to talk about how to write image descriptions and alt text later on. We're going to talk about doing it a lot before we get to that point. So hang in there for that. And then make sure that you are letting people know what accommodations you're providing using text or icons. So list that on your marketing materials, or using text or using an accessibility icon, which I'll show you what those are in the next page. And then make it really easy for someone to find contact information for someone if they have accommodation requests, needs, or questions. So on this screen are some examples of accessibility icons. I'm sure you are all familiar with the first one listed up there, which is the wheelchair accessibility icon. It's a very common one that we see all over the public sphere. But there are many more icons than what I have listed on the screen. Again, you can Google them and you can download them for free and then just pop one of these on your marketing materials. It's a quick and easy way for someone to say, oh, great, they're going to have ASL there. That means I can attend that event. Oh, great, they're going to have large print materials there. I will be able to access those. Super easy, quick thing to do. And you can use this in place of text, which might save you some space and room at the end. Okay, so that's kind of like the aesthetic part of designing. But we also want to make marketing that is inviting. So we want everyone, but in particular individuals with disabilities to feel welcome in a variety of ways when they are checking out any kind of marketing materials you're providing. So whenever possible, and this is more likely to happen on a website or a newsletter where you have a bit more space, but include your statements on accessibility and or inclusion if you have them. If you don't have one, then maybe ask yourself why not and see if you can start the steps to develop one. Someone goes to your website and the first thing that they see on that page is an inclusion statement or accessibility statement, they're going to be really excited because they're going to know immediately that you're committed to making your programs and spaces more accessible, and they're going to try to figure out how they can get there. Whenever you can, make sure that you are representing individuals with disabilities in your imagery. We're going to talk a little bit about representation at the end, like I said, and how you can do that if you do not yet have those kind of images and you're trying to get those kinds of images. Like I said in the previous slide, have a way for people to know how they can request accommodations. So not just an info at set, but an actual person that they can reach by phone or email if they have accommodation needs or questions. If you're developing some sort of registration or ticketing form, have a checklist where people can just check off the accommodations they need and then a space where they can write in additional ones if they need them. If you're already providing accommodations, which 5 stars if you are, list those icons and have them evident on that marketing material in some way. Make sure that your invite process is very screen reader friendly. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into websites and how that happens or what that really means. And then make sure that all of your language is at a 6th grade lexicon. 54% of adults in the US are below a 6th grade reading level. So we want to make sure that all the language that we're putting forth, all the copy we're putting forth is accessible in that way as well. And as arts organizations, sometimes we can get a little bit highbrow or artsy fartsy with our jargon and language. And so we just want to make sure that we're scaling that back so that everything we're sharing is accessible in that way. Audio video marketing, Joy.
So when making audio and video more accessible, there are numerous ways that individuals can do this. For example, for audio only context, transcripts should be included, and transcripts provide a text-based information of everything that is occurring in the presentation. And then also for videos, there are various traditional methods of accessibility, which include captions. They can either be open or closed captions, transcripts, as I mentioned previously, and also audio description, which I'll mention in the following slides. And the next slide goes on to discuss audio descriptions. So these descriptions, they provide blind and low vision users the ability to interpret non-visual elements within various films or multimedia presentations. And typically audio description, it's inserted into a break in the dialogue or a pause in the dialogue. It's usually inserted through a separate audio description track. And this provides the visual description of the individual, for example, what they're wearing, what they might be doing, their actions, body language, their environment, aspects such as that, and also to go further with the audio description besides just brief aspects of audio description. There's also the extended audio description, which this type of description goes further into the presentation and discusses other aspects with facial expressions and further environmental descriptions and nonverbal cues and things such as that. And also the challenge with audio description is that there are usually audio description writers that specialize in this type of audio description writing, and it's a painstaking process determining what to include in audio description and what not to include. So it's a lot that's involved in that aspect. And we'll go to the next slide. And the next slide refers to the technology I'll be discussing, which I use on a daily basis. It's a unique and incredible startup company. It's called Aira, which is an acronym for Access to Information Remote Assistance, connects blind and low vision individuals and also other disabled and non-disabled individuals to highly trained, professionally located visual interpreters that provide instant access to visual information anytime and anywhere. An Iris service is activated using either a smartphone or a desktop. It could either be accessed through iPhone or Android, and also Windows or Mac laptop, or desktop as well. And Aira users are referred to as explorers throughout the Aira community and beyond, because there's almost nothing that can be, almost anything is, there's nothing that can be achieved independently and efficiently. There's almost nothing is impossible without this technology, because the blind and low vision community and also the visual interpreters work together to provide this access to visual information. So whether it's accessing online museum content or accessing going into a museum, for instance, and learning more about the artworks, whether it's doing research about the artist or reading the visual labels or understanding a painting or any type of artwork, or whether it's a job-related task, whether it's an accommodation, navigating a new city, airport, park, an entire state. There are various states within the Aira ecosystem that are fully accessible with Aira. And I'll just briefly mention here that if anyone is interested, any organization is interested in becoming an access partner, they can go to, you can go to www.aira.io. It's just AIRA.io. And besides this, there's a new initiative that Aira is working on, which is a collaboration with museums and other cultural institutions. And this sector is growing rapidly as far as Aira access. So basically, Aira is a monthly subscription service that explorers pay for the service. And when it comes to other businesses and cultural institutions, universities, airports, whatever it happens to be, if the business or organization is interested in providing Aira access, they can collaborate with Aira so that the IRA Explorer does not have to pay the set fee when the individual goes on site, because it would come up if an individual can easily download the app from the Android, the Google Play Store, or the Apple App Store. And once it's downloaded and the Explorer has reached an IRA access location, a notification would instantly come up on their phone saying, whether through voice over the screen reader or magnification, that the site is IRA access. So we can go to the next slide. And the next slide is related to audio and video content. Again, where I do a quick comparison of open and closed captioning. So closed captioning is more of a traditional form of captions for the deaf and hard of hearing community. And these types of captions are typically found within movies, films, and other video content. It's usually found on YouTube and other video related platforms. It's always an advantageous and it's always advantageous to provide closed captions. There aren't as many unique features that can be turned on or off with closed captioning. But if someone is watching a video or a film, maybe related to a gallery or museum or another cultural institution, then closed captioning is always a positive aspect. And then open captions, it provides the automatic capacity for individuals to adjust the captions, whether it's adjusting the font size, color, contrast, number of words on each portion of at the bottom of the screen, whatever it happens to be. Then those are the major differences between open and closed captioning. And then the next slide, which refers to, goes into transcripts. And as I mentioned previously, transcripts can be used either for audio and video, whether it's spoken content specifically or multimedia content. And transcripts can also be, they can also incorporate not just the dialogue of the spoken text or the sounds that usually occur in films or presentations or other aspects such as this, but it can also include sometimes, but not as often, the visual aspect, what the individual may be seeing visually, and they're unable to decipher the key visual elements of the presentation. So the next slide.
Joy, can you talk a little bit about how some apps can generate transcripts and captions for you, but what then like the importance of editing them a little bit?
Okay, sure. Because for instance, their YouTube is a big one. They offer the capacity to either do transcripts or captions. But the most significant aspect is usually when it comes to YouTube or Facebook, they offer, for example, the ability to auto-generate captions. But the most significant portion of this is always to remember that it's never a good idea to just automatically to put out those auto-generated captions, because with the AI and the prevalence of AI within the United States and elsewhere, AI does make mistakes, and it's always necessary to check through these captions or transcripts when implementing these types of accessibility features. And recently, just for a quick story, a few months back, when I was attending it was an assistive technology conference, the largest in the world. It's called the California State University at Northridge Assistive Technology Conference. I had the opportunity to connect with a well-known deafblind lawyer from Harvard, and she was actually the first deafblind person to graduate from Harvard Law School. And she also did a presentation, and she specifically mentioned the significance of always checking these transcripts and captions, because especially for the deaf and hard of hearing community and others, there's always the understanding that the AI, as I said previously, can easily make mistakes. That they can hallucinate, which means that they incorrectly incorrectly discuss or auto-generate these aspects. So, and her name is Haben Girma. It's Haben, and last name is Girma. And the next slide is, then we move on to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, which is the acronym. And so WCAG was created by WAI, which is the International Organization for the Web Accessibility Initiative. And these guidelines incorporate a set of principles, 4 key principles, which are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And within these 4 key principles, there are various success criteria within all 4 of these aspects. And then we'll go to the next slide where I further discuss these WCAG guidelines. And so the WCAG 2.2, it was originally established in the early 1990s, and then over time, 1998 was the first iteration of WCAG, but since that time, there have been multiple versions of the WCAG initiatives, and the latest version is WCAG 2.2, which was just released a couple months ago. And this iteration defines how to make web content even more accessible for individuals with disabilities, whether it happens to be whether the disability type is visual, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning disabilities, for example. And although these guidelines cover a wide range of accessibility features, implementing and initiating WCAG as a whole is paramount also for the non-disability community, because in that case, when someone is initiating WCAG, they're not only covering the edge cases. In other words, this refers to the disability community. Like if you think of it as a circle, it's covering the entire sphere within the United States and elsewhere. So these guidelines also make web content more accessible for older adults, with changing visual acuity, hearing, mobility, whatever it happens to be. So then we'll go to the next slide and I'll discuss the newest aspects of WCAG 2.2, this short list here. So the success criterion, the first success criterion is 2.4.11, which is focus not obscured, which is the minimum, or AA. So within WCAG, there are 3 levels of compliance. You go from single, the lowest level of compliance, which is just single A, and then medium compliance is AA, and then the highest level of compliance is AAA. And in each of these success criteria, each of them, I have incorporated the clickable hyperlinks. So if any of you are interested in learning more later on after the presentation, you can just easily click on the link and just learn more about each of these success criteria. So the next one is 2.4.12, which is focus not obscured, and it's enhanced. As I mentioned, it's AAA, which is the highest compliance level. Then the next one is 2.4.13, which is focus appearance, which is AAA again. And then 2.5.7 is dragging movements, which is AA. Then 2.5.8 is target size. There's the minimum of AA, or there's the AA for minimum, and then there's the 3.2.6, the content help, which is just the single A, and then there's 3.3.7, redundant entry, that's single A again, and then 3.3.8 is accessible authentication, minimum for AA, and the last one is accessible authentication, which is the AAA standard again. And now I'll just go further into each success criterion. So first aspect, which I mentioned, is the success criterion is 2.4.13, focus appearance. So this is just a brief summary, so you can just get a more basic understanding of what this relates to. So when the keyboard focus indicator is visible, an area of the focus indicator meets all of the following guidelines, which is that it has to be at least as large as the area of the 2 CSS pixels, and it also has a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 besides the same pixels in the focused area. And the exceptions are that the focus indicator is determined by the user agent. And so this just refers to the user agent is the web browser, and it cannot be adjusted by the author, in other words, the web developer or designer, and that the focus indicator and that the indicator's background color are not modified by the web developer. So just for a quick example, if someone is navigating with a keyboard only, because they might have issues with muscular issues, and they can only navigate through the keyboard with the use of the keyboard, and they can't use the mouse, have to make sure that the focus range is large enough not only to see visually, but it's easily clickable as well. So then we'll go to the next slide. And the success criterion for this one, as I mentioned previously, it's 2.5.7. it's a dragging movement. So this relates to specifically individuals who are mouse users, or they might have issues, though. If they have motor disabilities, they may have a little bit more of an issue with using the mouse to drag the content, whether they're trying to drag an image to make it scalable. For instance, if someone's looking at an artwork or a newsletter and it says, or PDF, to increase the zoom level on the screen, then this success criterion would be the most beneficial. So all functionality that uses a dragging method for operation can be achieved by a single pointer, or in other words, single mouse device, without dragging, unless dragging is required or necessary. And the requirement applies to web content that interprets pointer actions. In other words, this refers to, as I said with the mouse, but this does not apply to actions that are required to operate the web browser or assistive technology devices. So then we'll go to the next slide here. And the next slide is 2.5.8 target size. So target size is basically just when it refers to it somewhat refers to links and buttons also somewhat. It's a little bit similar. So target size is basically the amount of room, the amount of space that a user has, regardless of how small or how large the specific target is when interacting with a button or a link or a text box, for example. So this is the minimum level of compliance. So the size of the target for the mouse input is at least 24 by 24 CSS pixels, except when there's the spacing, the undersized targets. It could be challenging to navigate if it's less than 24 by 24 CSS pixels, at the diameter of the circle is centered at the box of each of these targets. And I won't go into more, it's kind of a little bit too technical here, but the equivalent is, in other words, that the function can be activated through a different control on the same page, which is whether the user wants to interact with the clickable target size if the user is a keyboard only user, for instance, and if it is essential to not increase the target size, that a particular presentation of the target is essential or is largely required for the information being displayed on the screen, or if it may have a negative impact on the web page as a whole. And then we'll go to the next slide. So the next slide is success criterion 3.2.6, which is consistent help. And this success criterion is largely based on individuals with cognitive disabilities, but it can be beneficial for other disabled individuals as well, or not other non-disabled individuals, especially if the website is more complicated to navigate as a whole. And there are a lot of other web pages, and a user might find it more beneficial to require this website help. So if a web page contains any of the following help mechanisms, and those mechanisms are required on multiple web pages relative to other pages, they must be on the same portion of the page. So on separate pages. So it'll make it easier to find the location of these help mechanisms. And so it goes further here into discussing human contact mechanism, whether if your organization has a web page that has a directory of all of the employees at your site, and your web designers or developers have input this help mechanism to more easily navigate, or there's a fully automated contact mechanism. For example, if it's an AI-based mechanism, and if your website has implemented an AI chatbot, for example, and wanted to get more information from an AI chatbot rather than talking to a staff member, for example, if they give the hours or the contact information, or it might just be another way of interacting with the website, for instance. So then, okay, we'll go to the next slide. So the next success criterion is 3.3.7, which is redundant entry. So this feature is helpful for individuals that may be filling out a form, whether it's a membership form or other types of forms, or whether it's paying for a membership, for example, and they want to put in their home address and their credit card, and their credit card address is the same as their home address, and there might be an autofill text box. So the autofill might be available where the user can easily click in the autofill or check the checkbox that might say that the address was already listed for the home address and that it's exactly the same as the payment address, so that the input for the text box can be easily inserted once that checkbox is checked. So it says that the information, as I mentioned here previously, just have the information entered by or provided to the user that is required to be entered in other text boxes can easily be input in that same process. In other words, whether it's auto-populated, as I mentioned, or it's available for the user to select, like the checkbox. And the exception is if re-entering the information is essential, or that the information is required to ensure the security of the content, or that the previously entered information is no longer valid. Like, for example, if it's just a brief time that the user will be interacting with the site for the membership form, if it's on a time limit, for example, and it could be extended, like for a payment, and if the user doesn't want to have their payment information saved or autofilled, that would be an exception. So then we'll go to the next criterion, so which is the 3.3.8 accessible authentication, which is the minimum. and it's the a cognitive function test. So this is based on individuals more specifically with cognitive disabilities. So cognitive function test is it's remembering a password. Remembering a password or solving a puzzle is not required for any interaction on the web page. And there's another way for the user to more easily interact with the web page, and such as an alternative, which is another authentication method that does not rely on a cognitive function test, such as remembering the password or a puzzle, such as a CAPTCHA, for example. Those are one of the more common cognitive function tests. Or if you don't have your password autofilled, or if you decided not to have it saved in your web browser, for example, this would be another case when this success criterion would apply. And the mechanism is available, or there's a mechanism that's available to assist the user in completing the task, or the cognitive function test could recognize objects, but that instance isn't that common. So we'll go to the next slide, which is okay, about the homepage, and then Megan will take over.
Yeah. So I realized that was pretty like intense deep dives into website stuff. But I think it's great information to pass on to your web person or your web team, or if it's you, have those resources and you can learn how to make those really critical changes that are so helpful for individuals with disabilities in terms of navigating your website. And we have all the hyperlinks in there in multiple places in this presentation. So you can revisit those when we send you the presentation after today. We have about 30 minutes left. And so now we're going to talk more generally about websites. The first thing I want to talk about is the home page. And the only point that Joy and I are trying to make today about the home page is that we think that if someone with a disability is trying to figure out if they are able to partake in your programs or spaces or any kind of mission-based offer that you're putting out there via your website, they should be able to find your accessibility page quite easily from your home page. Whether that means it's linked right there at the bottom along with your contact information and your address, whether that means it is available on your homepage, but it should not be difficult to navigate for a lot of the reasons that Joy just mentioned. If someone can't find it, then they're probably just going to leave your website and decide that they're not able to come, unless they're feeling really motivated to find a phone number that they can call to find out more. So whenever you can, make sure with that, whatever accessibility offerings you have, that you are linking them to your home page so that they're visible or available immediately. We want to now talk a little bit about the danger of overlays, which is something that people who are working on websites trying to make them more accessible fall into the trap of. And Joy is going to talk about that just a little bit.
So overlays, the basic definition, they use JavaScript to try and fix various issues on websites, such as buttons and links, and not being clickable, which can also affect the font contrast and more. However, overlays require screen reader users to interact with them and turn this outside software on, which would in turn make it even more challenging for the blind or low vision user to more easily interact with overlays. And so there there's a popular overlay company and web accessibility company. It's called Accessiby. So in 2021, there were a lot of lawsuits and challenges because this organization claimed to state that they could easily fix any user's website, whatever their organization happened to be, with only one line of code and JavaScript. And not just that, there were also the assistive technology employees and other contractors who are blind and low vision. They work for them, and accessibility, for accessibility purposes, and the blind and low vision users were treated poorly from Accessiby. So that was an extremely negative aspect. And besides this, in 2021, the National Federation of the Blind, which I'm a member of, it's the largest organization of blind people in the country. They banned Accessiby from becoming a convention sponsor for the national convention because of their issue with overlays. And it's still an uphill battle, but the aspect is just not to use overlays if at all possible, because overlays are just dangerous and extremely inaccessible to use.
Some other general things that you can do to make your websites more accessible. One of the things that you need to do is make all your text copy more accessible and clear by incorporating directive text into your website so individuals can find exactly what they need based on text alone. A lot of individuals might use screen readers or have navigation devices that they're using or tools that they're using to access things on your website. So what do I mean by this? So anytime you are directing someone to a button or a link, you need to be as clear as possible where that is. So if you are saying, click here to register, people need to be able to click on that word here and know that that's going to take them to that new page. Otherwise, they may not know where here is. Or you can simply always put that option below the text. To register for this upcoming event, click the link below, and then that user would know, oh, they simply need to go down and click on that link. It's under that text. Anytime you're doing a button, you cannot assume that people are able to find buttons, nor know what that button function is for. So you always need to put on your button where that button is going to take you. There's a sample here on the screen. There's 3 different buttons. One says click here to apply to host. If you've read the text before that button, you know that they're talking about hosting a certain art exhibition. Another button says click here to download a PDF version of a host site application. So someone's hovering over that button, they're going to know exactly what they get if they click that button. And the third button is referring to a virtual tour of an exhibition that you can access via the button. Anytime you're sending someone to a new web page, that web page needs to open up in a new browser. This makes it much easier for someone who's navigating your web page to toggle back and forth between the web pages. So say they're registering for an event, but then they're like partway through the registration process and they're like, wait a minute, what time is this event again? Can I attend? Rather than them having to click back and go back to the original web page, they can simply toggle to the original web page, find that information they need, and then go back and complete the registration information. Joy, did you have something else you wanted to add to this?
So basically there's the aspect, so not just the browser aspect, so it would open a new window for the page. And typically when a screen reader user, or it doesn't specifically have to be a screen reader user specifically, it could benefit the other non-disability and disability community, but there are tool tips. So in other words, if an individual hovers their mouse over a specific clickable link, then the tooltip might say, would repeat, for example, like what was in the link text, like click the link, or it might state the name of the link like home or register, or just as an example.
And that function is built in when you are including those. It is built into website and newsletter, so you should be able to do this quite easily. The last point here is we have accessibility page and inclusion on other web pages. This is simply asking you to consider having an accessibility page on your website, a place where individuals can go, where they can find out what accommodations you're offering and who they can contact if they need to request accommodations. But Joy and I also think that anytime you have any kind of web page, web pages that you're navigating through via your website. Whenever you're offering accessibility for events, programs, things like that, you should be including what you're offering accessibility wise in those events. So there should not just be one page for accessibility, but accessibility should be included on all web pages. Joy. And Joy, we have about 25 minutes, so we need to just move a little faster to get through the
Okay,
rest of our
sure.
slides.
So some ways to make the websites more accessible. So just understanding the guidelines, as I mentioned, there's the color contrast, which we also mentioned, and then using descriptive headings. So making sure that these HTML tags are accessible and that they list the headings, specifically the actual name, and also using alt text, which we'll mention later for images with providing image description. So then the next slide, which is further other ways here, continuing on. So as I mentioned, transcripts are significant to include them, and using ARIA, which is a type of programming language, and it's an acronym, stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, specifically based for screen readers, which tells screen reader users more information about a link or button, for instance, whether a checkbox is checked or unchecked, for example. So then the next slide. So other web accessibility guidelines to keep in mind is making forms accessible. So ensuring that each portion of the form, whether it's the person's name, first and last name, their email, it's next to each form field. So the accessible label should always be next to the form field for not only screen reader users, but also keyboard users as well. And then providing clear navigation, whatever page that the user's on, making sure that there either is a sitemap at the bottom of the page, which gives the links list, or whether it's a hamburger menu, which is basically the drop-down menu, which has a listing of all of the links on a specific section. And also just I give these other links for more information on this page.
So there's some great websites for testing the accessibility, right, on your website. Yeah. All right, we have dug deep into websites. And now we're going to move on to social media. We are going to kind of be brief, a little bit brief about social media. I'm sorry, I'm trying to grab my my mouse. It's just really driving me bananas today. Because I have already done an entire social media workshop with my colleague, Austin from the Wexner Center, on social media accessibility alone. And so that is a resource I'm providing for you here today. There is a screen reader, or a QR code, excuse me, image on the screen, and then a direct link that you can go and you can check out that social media accessibility training separately if you wish to. The first thing we want to talk about, which we have been previewing for many slides, is visual descriptions, the importance of them, and how to write them. So I think we really talked about why they are important. They're important for screen readers, more specifically, but they can be useful for a lot of individuals for different reasons, depending how they're taking in your social media feeds. So how do you write alt text, and what the heck is it? So there are two different sometimes people use these words interchangeably, but there are two different kinds of visual descriptions that can occur on your website and in social media. One is alt text, a short for alternative text, which is a short textual substitute for non-text content used on digital web pages. And then this is usually a shorter description, a shorter visual description under 125 to 140 characters. Then there are image descriptions. They're sometimes called long descriptions that give more detail than alt text, allowing users to learn more about an image than the basic details. The more complex the image, the longer the description may be. These definitions, I'm giving full credit to Austin Dunn, who is the social media manager at Wexner Center for the Arts, by the way. I just wanted to give credit where credit due. So alt text is more something that you would include on the back end of your social media. All socials include these: Twitter, Facebook, X, or whatever I already said, Twitter, whatever it's called now, Instagram, have an option for including alt text. If you go to our webinar, you can learn exactly how to do it, or again, you can Google it or use the help function on any of those social media feeds to learn how to do it. And then an image description is something you're going to actually place in the post itself following the copy. We actually encourage you to use both of these options when you're creating social media posts. But using one is better than nothing. Now, also AI will sometimes provide alt text images or alt text for you. But these descriptions are very basic, not descriptive usually in any way. Sometimes they'll just say like person in a room. That doesn't really tell you anything about an image. So it is better to go in and edit that alt text if AI is doing it for you. You can see on the screen here an example of our social media post we did for this particular program that we're offering right now. You can see that I included an image description after my copy, right there above the image that is on the screen. So how do you write a visual description? So I'm going to give you a few pointers here. This is general knowledge and a good starting point for writing all our visual descriptions. And please know the biggest difference between alt text and image descriptions is one is shorter and one is longer. So you can actually use these guidelines for both. You would just use less text for that alt text you're writing. So the first tip is just to be description. I'm losing my words today, is to be specific in the description. So be specific and concise when it comes to writing alt text. By doing so, you're providing visitors to your socials a clear understanding of what the image is by using as few words as possible. Also consider the function or the purpose of the image and how to convey that concisely. In other words, what do you want your visitor to gain from the image? Point number 2, add context. Add context that's directly related to your social posts. If it's a generic image, tie it in with your post. For example, if the image is of the woman sitting in a seat, you might include the text to say, woman sitting in a theater on a wooden theater seat facing a stage of dancers in bright red dresses. How you word it will depend on the post topic. Your alt text is a combination of the image itself and the elements of the content surrounding it. Tip number 3, keep your alt text short. Be sure to include enough to adequately describe the image and convey its purpose. Longer descriptions full of flowery language and filler words can be distracting when you're using a screen reader and can be confusing to search crawlers. As you compose your description, keep in mind that screen readers generally will cut it off around 125 characters for alt text, so keep it concise and short. For long descriptions or image descriptions, that's where you can really get into the details of your image. Avoid using the words image of or picture of. The HTML code already identifies your image or picture as such, so avoid using it because it's just taking up space that you don't want to use. If the image does add context in some way, mention what type of image it is, such as a chart, a graph, an artwork, a screen grab, a headshot, or something like that. For like Now, we're all arts organizations, so sometimes we're using abstract images or very detailed images, and that can be overwhelming when we're trying to describe something. So for less abstract images, some tips that have been shared with me to describe what you're presenting would be to start by describing the center of an image and kind of work your way out. Or that's going to be for less abstract images as well. Or you can start at the top left-hand corner and kind of work your way across and then work your way down to describe. For artwork, you can use terms such as foreground, midground, and background to help you describe your images. Always check for spelling mistakes because that can sometimes be confusing to a screen or someone using a screen reader, or it can derail a screen reader for a few minutes. And you want to make sure that you're getting that image across. We're going to take the time now to practice with you all writing our own image description. I wanted to provide first a sample of what we used for our ID for the accessibility and marketing image that GCAC created for us. You can see the image on the left here, and the ID that we provided was, the image is a poster advertising a free virtual workshop on accessibility and marketing hosted by Art Possible Ohio. The workshop is scheduled for Tuesday, June 18th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. The poster features green color scheme and various design elements related to graphic design. Quite simple, gets across the point of the image, which was to advertise this marketing. And then, yeah, the design elements are a little bit, while beautiful, they're a little bit generic. And so we just said green, various design elements and the green color scheme, which is what it certainly is. So now we're going to practice here. We would love you all to take, how much time do we have? Literally 2 minutes to look at this image here on the left, which is another image that Art Possible had developed, and write your own quick alt text for this image. So go ahead and do that and put them in the chat, and I will try to read out what some folks shared with us today. Starting now. Yeah, I got one. Woo. Sorry. All right. Not seeing a lot come through, so perhaps you were all just very tired at the end of your day. So I will just share with you another example of an image description that we would have used for this particular image. Words on the left, 2021 to 2022, SMOA, Springfield Museum of Art, a Smithsonian affiliate. Photo in the image below, in a gallery, a woman stands, eyes shut and hands extended, exploring an abstract yellow and silver sculpture. Behind her, an abstract painting with blue and orange elements hang on the wall. Very simple, describing it exactly as we see. We don't go into too much detail, but it still gives a general description of what's happening in the image. I want to show you what the AI auto-generated text said. A person holding a plastic bag with a child in front of it, which is absolutely not at all what this image is of. So in terms of editing that AI, like Joy referenced earlier, please make sure you are doing so whenever you can, so that the best text is being put forward. Okay. Another thing that you can do that's quite simple and you can start doing right now is referring to any kind of hashtags, which are sometimes called Pascal case or title case on your social media. So this is simply capitalizing the first letter of each word in a hashtag. The hashtag works exactly the same, but it makes it much more readable for any individual reading the text. This is also something that you can do for your social handles. At Art Possible Ohio, we have quite a long social handle, 3 different words. So when I capitalize the first letter of each word, it makes it much more accessible and easier to read for anybody, especially people looking at on your phone on social media. You can actually apply this to your email address as well and your website, which I have examples of up there on the screen. Joy's going to talk quickly about emojis versus emoticons. Yeah.
So emojis are basically there. It's a lot easier to have screen readers read them because the code is already built around them and that they have the alt text included and the emojis. Whereas the emoticons, the screen readers won't do well with reading them at all. If they encounter like a smiley face, for example, it would just say period, and this parentheses. It wouldn't even read it correctly instead of like a smiling face emoji, for example.
Stories. Again, we're just talking about fonts and things like that. Please use clear and accessible fonts in any kind of story you're providing in social media. People love to use script. They love to use funky fonts. It makes it really hard to read for anybody who is trying to access that information. And then Joy's going to talk about using SVGs versus traditional images.
So using SVGs, they're a lot more accessible. So it stands for, it's an acronym, Scalable Vector Graphics, but they allow you to zoom in further, and it's not only beneficial for the blind or low vision user, it's also beneficial for sighted or other non-disabled users as well, because you can easily zoom in and have a scalable image without losing clarity, whereas a raster image, which is PNG, JPEG, for example, I mean, they're okay to use. They'd be on the medium end of accessibility, but it's far better to use SVGs rather than typical raster images.
Finally, I see some great questions coming through, so we are going to address them on the next after I get through this slide. So please keep typing them into the chat or holding them so that we can get to them. Our final point today is regarding representation. We talked about this briefly at the beginning, and design aesthetic, or making accessible and welcoming designs for your marketing materials. I don't think any of these tips will come as a surprise to you, but it's just really essential that we're as inclusive and authentic as possible in our imagery that we're sharing out on social media and our newsletters, any printed materials, our websites. When folks review marketing sources, they feel more welcome when they see folks like themselves represented in those images. Again, it's important to consider and reflect if you do not have images that represent the disability community or other marginalized communities. Does that mean your programs are not including these audiences? Why not? What can you do about it? Stock images sometimes can be used, but they're not really the best opportunity. And if they are a stock image, you should know that it's a stock image so that you can be as transparent as possible. You can consider hiring and paying individuals with physical disabilities as models to be part of your marketing campaign. Again, we'd rather have actual people who are participating in your programs be those models and be represented in your imagery. But please consider always compensating individuals who you are purposefully photographing for this kind of campaign that you're putting forward. And it's always essential to call out what you're doing. So if that is something you are choosing to do, talk about how you're trying to be more inclusive and welcome individuals with disabilities into your programs and spaces. And you're trying to represent that in this imagery. transparency is really essential and key because it highlights your organization's values. On the screen here, Joy and I were laughing because I use this image all the time in my presentations, but this is an image of Joy at an exhibition that we held at Cincinnati Art Museum. Joy is very humble, but she's also an artist, a visual artist, and she was part of our statewide exhibition this year that opened up at the Cincinnati Art Museum. The photographer at the event took this lovely picture of Joy, and then Cincinnati Art Museum used it over and over again on their website and their Facebook pages, because Cincinnati Art Museum works really hard to be an inclusive organization in terms of programming and policies. And I think they fell in love with this image as much as I did. This beautiful image of Joy standing in front of her artwork at an event that they had. So I always like to share it as an authentic image. But I also just think it's a really fabulous shot of Joy and her beautiful artwork that she puts out into the world. And then Joy has one more comment about a best business model.
So the most important thing to keep in mind is whether you're a designer or developer or extremely passionate about helping with the design of a website, it's always imperative to think about the business model, or in other words, think of in terms of, in business, it's called return on investment. So in other words, the web design isn't solely referring to the disability community and making experiences more inclusive and accessible for the disability community. It makes your marketing campaigns more accessible for everyone.
Thank you, Joy. That is all we have to say to you. And I know it was a whole lot today. I just want to go through these next few slides. I'm not going to talk about them, but they're just a lot of resources that Joy and I put together that you will have once we send this presentation to you. Mostly our websites that you can find some tools and more resources to make your marketing more accessible. But we also wanted to take time, and we have 4 minutes to take some questions, and there already are a few in the chat. So I'm going to pull those up. But if you have additional questions, unless you're unable, we would prefer that you put them in chat so that we can manage them most effectively. If you are not able to type them in the chat, you're welcome to raise your hand or unmute and speak. Taisha asked, I do have a question. She said, do you encourage descriptions of racial tone, etc., when describing images? And Joy, you may have an answer. I would say the best practice for that is if you're featuring an artist or an individual that you know well, it is best to get their own personal visual description, because we don't want to make assumptions about identity. However, if we do not know that individual, I do encourage using racial descriptions. And there's a wonderful resource that I did not include, a really great web page that gives you some guidance for that, because it can be a little bit intimidating. So I will make sure to include that in the resources and mark it as such. Joy, do you have anything else to add to that?
I agree too with you, Megan. Well, sometimes it can be more confusing with the racial aspect, but whenever possible, try to include the individual's racial identity if possible.
Absolutely. And then Daniel said, when describing a graphic like that embedded text, like the example provided, is it helpful to include the full text in the image description? Daniel, do you mean like any text that's in the image?
In the graphic itself, or?
Is that what you mean, Daniel?
Because it's never a positive aspect to have it in the graphic, but having
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So the Springfield Museum of Art graphic, there was a photographic image in the bottom right corner, but then there was text on the top left. And I just wanted to understand, is it advisable that you mention that text if it's not readable by a screen reader?
Do you mean like the logo that was mentioned, or just the text here?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I would put the text.
Yes.
I would put the text in there. You could just put text that
Right.
write it out. I have had issues where there's too much text in the in the image. And so that probably means, oops, sorry, I didn't mean in the slideshow, that you need to have less text in the image. However, if you have, for social media, if you have all of that image, if you have all of that text in the copy that you're providing for a social media post, and you do not have enough room in your alt text to include it, you can say, text from post copy. You can find a way to reference the post copy for that text if it has really important details like date and time and things like that. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that's what I was wondering.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We're exactly at 4:30 and you've been hanging out with us a really long time. We're so grateful. Well, you can certainly reach out to Joy and I if you have additional questions. I'm sure there are some things that you're still like, what the heck are you, what am I supposed to do for this? Or how do I do it? Or you didn't talk about this. So you can reach out to me at megan@artpossibleohio.org or joy.misto@gmail.com. Again, we'll be sending these slides to you either directly from me or through GCAC, where you registered for this event. But I want to thank you all for being here today. Joy, do you have any words of wisdoms that you want to sign off with? Not to put you on the spot.
Just making sure and remembering that to try and always make your websites and social media content or digital media content in general as accessible and inclusive as possible.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.